Welcome to Let's Talk Writing with Kerstin and Edwina,
coming to you from Madangi country
in Babinda, Far North Queensland, Australia. Welcome to today's episode. We'll talk about how to write your story. What happens once you get a good idea? How do you actually then write that story, Edwina?
Well, there are many different ways, but the first thing is you actually have to start. Don't keep talking about it with your friends about this magnificent idea you've got. Don't spend that time because it uses all the energy actually that builds up behind an idea. So instead, as Kerstin said in an earlier episode, set a time every day. So for busy people, this may be waking up even just half an hour earlier and sitting down and writing in your journal, but writing on your story or taking your laptop, putting it on the bed and off you go. But even just half an hour, setting a timer can be a really effective way. When I first started writing my first novel, which will forever remain in the bottom drawer, but when I first started writing it, I had 1 hour where my small children were asleep, and I would just sit there and write like a fury, and that was it. So I was a complete Panster in those days. I just wrote, following the flow, enjoying the exploration, but then you end up with a pretty big mess. So I would advise at least now having an ending in mind that you are writing towards. I don't know, how did you go about starting to write your memoir?
Well, actually, I wrote it first in the my journal, and then once I decided, okay, this needs to be a story that I want to tell, I actually made an events list. I made a list of all the different turning points and the different plot points. So this actually brings me back to a term you just mentioned. You said Panster, and that comes from the word from the expression writing by the seat of your pants, because there's different types of writers. There's those who actually map everything out, and this is particularly helpful, let's say, if you're writing crime fiction or genre fiction, where you know exactly where your midpoint is, you know, where your turning points are, your ending. And a pantster is somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. They discover the story as they write. And both are really good approaches. So with regards to my writing, I started to then make a list. What are some good scenes I could use to illustrate the overarching message or premise of my book? And I started writing those. And one of the pieces of advice that came from that I then pass on to my students is, don't sit down to write your novel. Today I'm going to write my book. No. Today, I sit down to write 500 words towards my book, 1,000 words. Today, I'm going to write scene X. And this is, I think, really psychologically helpful because it takes away that overwhelm, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and from Vinny Amano, one of the first workshops I ever went to, he gave us a thing where you put the date, you put what you've written, like the scene or whatever, and then you put your word count. Yeah. And watching that word count mount up fast is really inspirational. But you've also touched on another point there. We are writing in scenes. Yes. So it's very, very important that you think in scenes. Don't think of, I'm going to start telling my story, so should I start when my grandparents first met back in the old country? No. Start your story as close to the moment of great change as possible, especially if it's a short story, but even with longer works. And then, as you say, plot out those important moments. So if it's from life, then those moments are already in existence, so you can just map them out. If you're writing a novel or some other long form that isn't from life, then you need to invent what some of those points might be. So just thinking of what a few of those points might be and writing scenes. Thinking in scenes.
Yes, that is key. Actually, when I realized that you have to write in scenes, that is when everything changed for me. Because then I knew you don't have to write, you have your scene, but like you said, you started late, and then you don't have to write all the in-between stuff. He made a phone call, he invited her out. Yes. You don't then have to say he put the phone down, he made himself a cup of tea, he had a nervous breakdown in the bathroom, what have I done the next morning? No, you just go straight to whatever happens next, the date or not.
Yes.
But you also touched on something. How do you actually know whether your story is, because you mentioned memoir, is a memoir? How do you know that your story has the running power for a book? How do you know that your story idea should be a short story? What's your advice there?
Well, I think if you have just one main emotional moment, then it's definitely something short. But if you have multiple emotional strong points, then it's going to be longer. And of course, if you get a novel idea, it is much bigger and much more complex. A short story, when it comes, you can sort of feel the whole thing or see the whole thing completely in your mind. Whereas with the novel, you can't envision it all. It's too big.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think that's the main thing. Some stories you might start off thinking that it's a novel, but then you'll pretty quickly run out of steam. And that's when you know, oh, okay, so it's not a full 80,000 word novel. This is a 20,000 word novella, because we have those in between as well.
Yes.
And there is now a more marketable process for novellas as well. But short stories now, especially flash fiction, 500 word, 1,000 word.
Yes,
so little short turning points. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, when you are starting out as a writer, to really hone your craft, flash fiction is a great way to do that, because you have your one turning point, and then maybe a surprise at the end. And that really trains you to write in that story arc form, but in a very short space. And you can finish a piece of flash fiction in an hour, in 10 minutes even. So that gives you also the confidence. Oh, I can do this. So train yourself by not perhaps going immediately with the big, great novel. Maybe start small with a short story, with a blog post, with a piece of flash fiction. So that's...
And with whatever you're writing, as we were saying before, writing in those short pieces. Don't try and think, okay, I have to reach the end of my novel today, or yes, it can become overwhelming. So just thinking in those little short bits, think small, but keep going forward. Another big no-no is going back and I'll just fix that introduction. No, because I've had friends, that first paragraph is almost killed dead, and there's been no progress. So just keep writing, going
Am
forward.
I this friend? Because I have done that. And Edwina has just edited my book.
The beginning's very tight.
But yes, I have been that person who has forever edited the beginning and again. And then suddenly it's like, hang on a minute, I have to get to the middle bit.
Yeah.
But also you did ask me before, how do you, get started? We did this in another episode. And actually one good way to get started is maybe not at the very first day, but eventually to write your ending, and knowing that the ending will be rewritten. But I found that really helpful. This is something that I learned. I wrote the ending, the final chapter of my memoir, and that gave me sort of a benchmark to aim for.
You're aiming for it. And even if it isn't written, you've just got to know what it is, so you can keep heading for that point. Because especially when you're a pantster, you can go off here and go off there. But if you know that that's where you're heading, you can pull yourself back in line and keep heading to that right direction.
And so, panster or plotter, which one has? I mean, do you feel like you need to re-educate the pansters to become plotsters, or is there any benefit in starting to think about structure immediately?
You save a lot of time.
Yes.
As an old pantster, I've written many novel drafts of over 100,000 words that then I had to cut back to 30,000 because I'd gone so off track and let the characters have their own way. We are actually the bosses. Don't let those characters boss you around too much. Yes, having a few of those points, even if it's just the end point, because there is a lot of joy in the discovery process.
And also knowing your midpoint, knowing your inciting incident, knowing where your midpoint is, and so on. I found that extremely helpful in my own writing, my memoir. Once I actually paid attention to structure, I did exactly what you just said. I had written maybe initially 170,000 words, Well, it turns out for a memoir, 80,000 words is a good amount. So I had to then cut it back. So yes, pay attention to structure from the beginning, and you'll find great resources on our websites and also in upcoming videos.
And a writing prompt for today is write your own heart-clutching moments. Yes, so write down a few of those moments of turning points in your life if it's a memoir, or that could happen to your character if it's fiction, and then just get them down. Just a list, and then you've got something to work on as you go through sitting down every day writing. Good luck. Happy writing. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Writing with Kerstin and Edwina.
And here are our links. Please follow us and leave comments. Happy writing.
That's good.